Hello, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
Hi, this is Doug Dubach. Welcome to the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazer, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at KTM's all-new 1998 250SX. Now, if you're just turning pro now, chances are you probably think of KTM very differently than somebody my age does. When I was growing up in the 80s, the KTM was kind of like a niche player. I really didn't see, honestly, I didn't see a KTM in person until the mid-90s. There was nobody around here that I knew had one. You saw them in the magazines, but they were rare to see. Now, they did have some success in Europe. You had guys like Heinz Kindergartner and some of these European guys. Gennady, I think is how you say it. Mosiev in the 70s had won some world titles on the KTMs. But here in the U.S., they were really just kind of a bit player. Most everybody rode the Japanese. Every now and again, you'd see somebody in Husqvarna, but KTM to me was one of these really exotic machines you just didn't see in person. And they had some really tough times there. They ended up actually declaring bankruptcy in the early 90s, almost went completely out of business, much like Mako and so many other European brands had done in the past. But KTM came out of that restructuring much stronger. And then by the late 90s, they really started to at least try to compete a little more with the Japanese head-to-head. And this 98 was a really important machine. It was really, at least in my mind at the time, certainly the first KTM that seemed like it was ready to go head-to-head with the Japanese. A good buddy of mine had a 97 KTM, and it was just a weird machine. I had a 360, and I did not like this motorcycle at all. I found it to be extremely hard to ride. The seat was like hard as a rock, and it just felt weird. And after getting off the Japanese, and I think in 98, they really tried to make the bikes at least feel more like the traditional Japanese. They did go their own way with things like suspension, though. This first 98 has conventional forks, which Suzuki was still doing at the time, but they were the only one. And this is the first year they went to the no-link suspension. I think most people, again, if you were younger, you probably think that KTMs just didn't used to have linkages. That was like their thing. But actually, from like, I guess, 82, 83, they had linkages like all the Japanese bikes did until 98. They went with this new no-link suspension. And this was, it was an interesting idea. I've had several KTMs with the no-link suspension. I've had 205s and an 08. It's actually 208s. And I actually had no problem with it at my speed. It was fine. They work perfectly well as far as that goes. But I wasn't blitzing Supercross whoops. I think the pros had a real problem with the way that the no-link worked. I think they worked much better off-road. They had kind of a dead feeling. They wouldn't, my XC, they wouldn't kick off logs and roots. And they had a very stable when you hit stuff feel. But of course, maybe that wasn't the best in a Supercross track. So I'm sure they were good at some things, not good as others. KTM definitely went for it with these bikes. They tried to do something different, and at least it showed that they were trying to be competitive, trying to really push the envelope a little bit. And this 98 really is the first bike that kind of got them back on that road to success you see today. It would take another decade really for them to, maybe a decade and a half, really till Ryan Dungey got there to really start taking things over. I mean, today they dominate racing. It's crazy. They just bought Gas. They have Husqvarna. They really are the dominant off-road brand these days. And you think back to these days in the 90s, it really wasn't that way. So this is going to cover a look back at that 98 machine, which was all new that year. If you do like this sort of thing, make sure you check out the other videos on my channel. I have tons of other classic reviews. I just did one on the 2001 Kawasaki KX250. I've also done one on the 2003 KTM, the bike that infamously Jeremy McGrath retired on, and several other vehicles. I'll be doing some more KTM and other brands in the future as well. If you'd like to support what I do have Motocross Vault merch available. I'll put a link here in the description. I just came out with a new design based on Todd DeHoop's 1994 CR250. Actually, Todd DeHoop asked me to do that for him, so I was happy to do that. I love those HOT bikes. They're really cool. Look there in 94 with the black tanks and what have you. Very unique. And so if you'd like to pick that up, it is on my Teespring store. I also have one based on the 1986 RC500 and pretty much everything. I got all kinds of stuff there. So if you like some cool stuff and you like to support what I do, you can find all that stuff on my Teespring store. If you could share, subscribe, and comment below. Don't forget to ding that little bell as well. That definitely helps let you know when I do a new video. It helps the channel grow, and I certainly appreciate all the support. So here's the story of the 1998 KTM 250SX. Today, KTM is one of the most successful brands in all of off-road motorcycling. They lead on the track with cutting-edge technology and lead in the showrooms with the most diverse lineup of offerings in the off-road world. Two-strokes or four, motocross or off-road, no brand covers as many bases as KTM. While today's KTM is on top, it was not all that long ago that they were on the ropes. In the 80s and early 90s, KTM was more of a curiosity than a contender. Their bikes were often advanced, but out of step with the American market. Their chassis favored stability above turning, and their motors were often more enduro than supercross. This made them popular with off-roaders, but held them back in the hyper-competitive motocross market. In 1991, this lack of sales success came to a head, with KTM actually filing for bankruptcy proceedings. While the company survived, it was forced to restructure and divide their holdings into two separate entities. Under this restructuring plan, the new company was divided into four discrete operations. One division handled their radiator business, another dealt with tool manufacturing, a third produced bicycles, and the last handled the production of motorcycles. This new motorcycle division became KTM Sportcycle AG and began the arduous task of rebuilding their tarnished reputation. With more autonomy and less corporate red tape, the new KTM Sport Motorcycles was free to try new ideas and push into niche markets, not being served by the Big Four from Japan. The result of this was monster machines like the 550MXC and trick little minis like the 50cc SXR. Nimble was a new buzzword for KTM, and they knew that the best way for them to succeed was to hit the Japanese where they weren't. In 1998, KTM brought this strategy to market with the most radically redesigned motocross machines in their history. All new from the ground up, the 1998 lineup did away with nearly 2 decades of suspension design and 30 years of tarnished reputation. The new machines combined cutting-edge technology with simplistic design and wrapped it in sleek new bodywork. Lighter, leaner, and literally unlike anything else on the track at the time, the 1998 machines were a whole new type of KTM. Of all the changes made for 98, probably the most significant was in the new bike suspension design. Starting in the early 80s, motocross rear suspension had moved away from the simplicity of dual shocks and toward the complexity of rising rate linkage curves. The implementation of the rising rate linkage allowed the engineers to tune suspension to be supple on small bumps while also retaining sufficient bottoming resistance on hard impacts. For 1998, KTM decided to abandon this proven technology in favor of an all-new design that combined the simplicity of the past with the technology of the future. Dubbed the Progressive Damping System, or PDS, this new design did away with the rising rate linkage completely and replaced it with a single damper bolted directly from the frame to the swing arm. A decade earlier, boutique motorcycle manufacturer ATK had employed a very similar system on their Austrian-powered and US-built machines to good effect. Through careful shock placement and expert valving design, ATK was able to mimic the performance of the traditional linkage-equipped machines while saving weight and shedding complexity. While never a mass-market success, ATKs were prized for their innovation and performance. For their new design, KTM took much of what ATK had accomplished and looked to improve on it by adding the latest in damping technology. In order to allow this new damping to work, the WP engineers spec'd a shock that incorporated 2 pistons and a special needle valve. In this design, one damping piston was designated to react to the speed of fluid through the damper, and the other was set up to respond to the position of the shock body on the shaft. By employing this special damping system and carefully selecting the angle of the shock in relation to the frame and swing arm, KTM believed they would be able to mimic the performance of a linkage without the weight and packaging compromises required by a traditional design. In literature, KTM labeled the PDS shock a smart shock and proclaimed it as the world's first motocross shock with a brain. In order to accommodate the new shock, KTM had to design an all-new chassis to match. The new frame was powder-coated gray and fashioned out of tough chromoly steel. Using a box-section backbone and a steeper geometry than 1997, the new frame was stronger and much more resistant to torsional flex than before. Bolted to the new frame was an all-new swing arm that was beefed up and, like the frame, far stiffer than 97. Finishing off the chassis package was a Sano alloy subframe, which was removable, a slick side access airbox, and a slim and trim set of new bodywork. The bodywork in particular was a major upgrade, with a far less stodgy appearance and ergonomics that were finally designed for the American market. Up front, an all-new set of 50mm WP Extreme forks replaced the slightly problematic Marzocchi Magnum forks of 97. As in 97, KTM eschewed the conventional wisdom of the time by rejecting the inverted forks used by most manufacturers in favor of a non-inverted conventional design. In the mid-90s, the jury was still out on which fork configuration worked best, with both KTM and Suzuki trying to resurrect this old technology. In the motor department, KTM kept the same bottom end they had used in 1997, but bolted on a completely redesigned top end for 98. The new cylinder incorporated a Honda ATAC-style resonance chamber into the exhaust port for the first time, and retained the case reconfiguration that KTM had used since 1990. The exhaust add-on was coined the KTM torque chamber, and it was designed to boost low-end power by increasing head pipe volume at low RPMs. As a benefit, KTM also claimed it helped attenuate the sound for a less obnoxious exhaust note. On the track, the all-new KTM turned out to be a major improvement in some areas and a bit of a setback in others. Chief among these setbacks had to be the 250's new Brainiac shock. In spite of its trick internals and novel design, it turned out to do a pretty crappy job of taming the track. As delivered off the showroom floor, the PDS shock was overdamped and stiff to the point of punishing. On small chop, you felt every pebble, and on big hits, it crashed into a wall of damping mid-stroke. It was incredibly harsh in action and unloved by nearly everyone. At the press launch of the 98 KTMs, their engineers warned that the shock would require a lengthy break-in to smooth out its action, but by all accounts, that smoothing never really happened. Up front, things were far rosier, however, as the 50mm WP Extreme forks did a great job of offsetting the shock's many problems. They offered 11.8 inches of travel and adjustments for both compression and rebound damping, with one leg handling the compression and the other handling the rebound. Their performance was plush on the small stuff and sufficiently firm on hard hits. Pros still found the conventional forks too flexy, but most mere mortals approved of their compliance. The new WP forks also seemed to maintain their performance far longer than previous KTM conventional designs. Seal life was much improved over the old Marzocchi units, and the internals seemed to last longer before requiring a rebuild. Overall, the WP Extremes were rated either first or second in the majority of the magazine shootouts in 1998. On the motor front, the KTM's new 249cc motor turned out to be a pretty big disappointment overall. In 97, the KTM had offered a powerful mid and up motor that was more than capable of running with the Japanese competition. It was slightly soft down low, but it was blistering on top. For 98, KTM's engineer tried to boost the bike's torque without sacrificing that top-end pull. Unfortunately, however, the new cylinder and power valve design only accomplished half this plan. The new motor was smoother off the bottom, pleasant in the middle, and very mild on top. The power band was wide, but utterly lacking in any pizzazz. There was no hit, no burst, and absolutely none of the shrieking top-end power of 97. If anything, it most resembled one of KTM's Enduro motors. This meant that it was easy to ride and great on slick tracks, but slow feeling everywhere else. For motocross, more power was a must. In the chassis department, the new KTM turned out to be a substantial improvement over previous Austrian efforts. The stiffer frame and steeper geometry finally delivered a KTM that could turn. Pilots no longer needed to search the track looking for a rut or berm to bounce off of. Instead, they could dive to the inside line and count on the front wheel to hold its line through the turn. Unfortunately, the flip side of this newfound nimbleness was a very Honda-like wobble when coming down from speed. In stock condition, the new PDS shock jacked up the rear of the KTM like a funny car. It sat high in the travel and really never settled down like a traditional linkage rear end. This, combined with the mismatched suspension settings and steep geometry, gave the KTM a mighty case of headshake. Considering most KTMs up to this point handled like freight trains, this was a singularly new experience for the Austrian brand. One of the bright sides of the new 250 was certainly its new bodywork. The all-new plastic ditched the slightly odd butterscotch color of 97 in favor of a much deeper hue of orange. The new Z-shaped shrouds were stylish, and the updated layout was the slimmest in the class. For once, the ergonomics were even good, with very little of the traditional quote-unquote Euro feel that had put off many American riders up to this point. Only the absurdly hard saddle remained, to remind Billy Bob that this machine came from Mattighofen instead of Tokyo. On the detailing side, the new KTM was a step forward over previous Austrian efforts, but still a tick behind the Japanese in some categories. On the plus side were its strong alloy bars. The Japanese at the time were still shipping their bikes with steel butter bars in 98. The Trick side-access airbox, which made servicing the air filter more convenient, and the maintenance-free plated exhaust pipe. The graphics were also very durable and long-lasting, and there was no linkage to worry about maintaining. On the bumper side were its bizarre assortment of fasteners, constantly loosening itself shock bolts, easily frayed seat cover, lackluster brakes, and fragile clutch. In 1998, the 250 also did not get the Trick new hydraulic clutch found on the 125 and had to make do with a traditional cable for its operation. While this was not really a handicap, its subpar plate life was. Overall, the 1998 KTM 250SX proved to be a major step forward for the brand, but not the Dragon Slayer many in Austria had hoped for. Packed with innovations and clearly willing to go its own way, the new 250 proved both more conventional and more eccentric than any KTM before. With its no-link Smart Shock and conventional forks, it provided a very unique alternative to the Japanese offerings of the time, while still catering to the moto mainstream with better ergonomics and sharper handling. Its motor was still more tree dodger than burn buster, but for someone looking to march to the beat of a different drummer, the 1998 KTM 250 offered the most compelling Austrian argument since the days of John Penton. So there you have it. That's the story of the 1998 KTM 250SX, a machine that certainly signaled KTM was on the road to recovery there, kind of really starting to push the envelope in terms of design. This bike obviously wasn't a huge success in terms of sales, I don't think, or market share for KTM yet. It would take a few more years for them to really kind of make a dent in the Japanese, but this was definitely the first one where they really were kind of trying to take it and go in a more mainstream in terms of at least the way the bike felt. I love the way it looks. It's a cool looking motorcycle. Again, I had no problem with the no-link suspension. I thought it worked fine for my speed. And I think a lot of people liked them just fine. Just maybe not a great pro bike. But this 98 KTM was really an important machine for them, and definitely started the wheels rolling towards putting KTM back to where they are today. So again, if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other stuff I've done on the channel. If you could like, subscribe, and comment below, I'd very much appreciate it. Share it on social media. Help me grow the channel. I'd appreciate that as well. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.